Went on a boat ride with my husband, but then I passed out. When I came to, I was alone on a desolate island. I spotted my husband on a boat abandoning me there. He waved and shouted, "Goodbye, loser. You'll never see me again." I survived alone for an entire year. One day, I spotted a vessel. In that instant, I already knew the payback I had plotted would be both ruinous and sweet. Turned out that I never thought my anniversary cruise would become my tomb. One minute, I was toasting champagne with the man I loved, the next, my world went black, and I woke up to pure, terrifying silence. The bitter taste of sand was the first thing I registered, then the screeching gulls overhead. My head throbbed, a brutal drumbeat against the harsh sunlight. I blinked, pushing up on shaky arms, only to find myself on an unfamiliar beach, dense jungle stretching behind me. Looking back, I should have noticed something was off about the way Ethan kept insisting I drink more, how that champagne tasted so wrong. But I was too caught up in the romance of it all, the Caribbean sunset, our rented yacht, the promise of a week away from everything. By the third glass, my head felt heavy. The world tilted, and it had nothing to do with the waves. I remember reaching for the railing, my fingers slipping, Ethan's face swimming into view, his expression utterly unreadable. And then, nothing. That's when I heard it, the distant hum of an engine. Stumbling to my feet, I turned towards the sound. Our yacht, was about 200 yards offshore, steadily pulling away. And there, on the deck, stood Ethan. My husband of 3 years. He was waving. His voice, carried clear and mocking across the water, cut through me, "Goodbye, loser. You'll never see me again." I screamed his name until my throat was raw. I ran into the surf, my dress tangling around my legs, the water reaching my waist. The yacht just kept going, shrinking, a white dot on the horizon. Then it was gone. Just like that. The first night was an absolute nightmare. No supplies, no shelter, no fresh water. I huddled under a cluster of palms, shivering even in the tropical heat, trying to process what had just happened. Ethan had drugged me. He'd abandoned me on this island. He'd planned this. Why? The question circled my mind like a predator. Sure, we'd had problems, what marriage doesn't? But nothing that justified this. Nothing that explained the pure, cold calculation in his eyes as he waved goodbye. I spent the next morning exploring. The island was small, maybe 2 miles across at its widest. Rocky cliffs dominated the western side, and the interior was thick, almost impenetrable jungle. But I found a freshwater stream cutting through the center, which meant I wouldn't die of dehydration. Small mercies. By day 3, I'd fashioned a crude shelter from palm fronds and driftwood. My designer sundress was already torn and stained beyond recognition. I'd figured out how to crack coconuts against rocks. I'd also realized Ethan had taken my phone, my wallet, everything except the clothes on my back and my wedding ring. I threw the ring into the ocean on day 4. The weeks blurred together. I learned to catch fish using a spear I'd sharpened from a sturdy branch. I learned which berries were safe and which made me violently ill. I learned to make fire using friction, though it took countless attempts and left my hands covered in blisters. I learned that loneliness could be its own kind of death. At night, I'd lie in my shelter and think about Ethan. Not the Ethan I thought I'd married, the charming financial analyst who swept me off my feet at that art gallery opening. No, I thought about the real Ethan, the one I'd apparently never known. I pieced together the clues I'd missed. The way he'd insisted I quit my job as a marketing director after we married, saying it was so we could spend more time together. Really, he'd wanted me dependent. The way he slowly isolated me from my friends, always having some excuse why we couldn't attend their gatherings. The way he took over managing our finances, putting everything in his name alone. And then, the life insurance policy he'd taken out on me 6 months ago, for $2 million. At the time, I'd thought it was responsible planning. Now, I understood it was a down payment on my demise, because that's what this was. He'd left me here to die, counting on the island's remoteness and the vastness of the ocean to ensure I'd never be found. He'd go home, wait a respectable amount of time, report me missing, play the devastated husband. Then he'd collect the insurance money and move on with his life. The rage kept me alive during those first months. I survived out of pure spite, determined not to give him the satisfaction of my death. Around the 3-month mark, I realized I'd need more than spite if I wanted to last. I needed a plan. So, I started thinking like Ethan would think, calculating, methodical, always 3 steps ahead. First, I needed to stay alive long enough to be rescued. That meant securing better food sources and improving my shelter. I wove stronger walls from palm fronds and vines. I dug channels to collect rainwater. I created a smoking rack to preserve fish. I mapped every inch of the island, memorizing its resources and dangers. Second, I needed to prepare for the day I got off this island. That meant staying physically strong. I developed a routine of exercises, swimming in the lagoon, climbing the rocky cliffs, running along the beach. My body transformed from soft and pampered to lean and hard. My hands, once manicured, became calloused and capable. Third, I needed to plan my revenge. This is what I thought about during the long, empty hours. How to destroy Ethan as completely as he tried to destroy me. I couldn't just have him arrested for the incident. He'd covered his tracks too well. We'd rented the yacht through a private owner, paid in cash, told no one where we were going. He probably reported me as having fallen overboard accidentally during the night. Maybe he'd even manufactured some evidence to support it. My blood on the deck, my shoe floating nearby. No, I needed something more devastating. I needed to tear apart his entire life, piece by piece, the way he'd torn apart mine. The answer came to me during my 6th month on the island. I was sitting on the beach watching the sunset when I remembered something. Ethan's business partner, Marcus Thorne, had been at our wedding. He'd gotten drunk and cornered me by the cake, complaining about how Ethan was cutting him out of deals, hiding revenue from their joint ventures. At the time, I'd brushed it off as wedding drama. But what if there was more to it? What if Ethan's business dealings weren't as clean as he claimed? I started going through every conversation, every document I had ever seen in Ethan's home office. My memory had always been sharp, something Ethan had both admired and resented about me. I reconstructed figures, dates, names. I remembered file folders labeled with account numbers. I remembered phone calls Ethan had taken in hushed tones, thinking I couldn't hear him from the next room. Slowly, a picture emerged. Ethan wasn't just a financial analyst. He was running some kind of investment scam, taking money from clients and funneling it through offshore accounts. Marcus had been part of it initially but was being pushed out. That's why Ethan needed the insurance money. He was either running from the law or running from people he'd stolen from. Maybe both. This was my leverage. This was how I would destroy him. But I needed to survive long enough to use it. The 7th month brought a violent storm that nearly ended me. Wind tore apart my shelter like it was tissue paper. Waves surged halfway up the beach. I huddled in a cave I'd discovered in the rocky cliffs, listening to the howling wind and wondering if this was how it would end. When the storm passed, half my supplies were gone. I had to start over, building a stronger shelter further inland, creating better storage for food and water. It set me back weeks. The 8th month brought fever. Something I ate, or something that bit me, I never knew which. I spent days shaking and delirious, barely able to drag myself to the stream for water. I came close to dying then, closer than I like to think about. But spite is a powerful medicine. I survived. By the 9th month, I'd achieved something like equilibrium with the island. I knew its rhythms, its moods, its dangers. I could predict when storms would come by watching the birds. I could find food even during scarce periods. I created a signal fire I could light quickly if I ever saw a ship, though none had appeared. I also started talking to myself, which probably wasn't a good sign. But the silence was crushing, and hearing a human voice, even my own, helped keep me sane. I'd narrate my daily tasks, discuss my revenge plans with imaginary audiences, even argue with phantom versions of Ethan. You thought I was weak, I'd say while sharpening my fishing spear. You thought I'd curl up and die out here. The 10th month brought a moment of despair so profound, I almost walked into the ocean and kept going. It was our anniversary, not the fake one Ethan had chosen for the cruise, but our real wedding anniversary. I'd been on this island almost as long as we'd been married. Everything I'd built with him had been a lie, and now I was alone on this godforsaken rock with nothing but coconuts, fish, and my own tortured thoughts. But I didn't walk into the ocean. Instead, I climbed to the highest point on the island and screamed until my voice gave out. Then I climbed back down and kept surviving. The 11th month brought an unexpected gift. I found a sealed plastic container washed up on the beach, the kind used for emergency supplies. Inside was a working flare gun with 3 flares, a waterproof blanket, and a first aid kit. It had probably fallen off some cargo ship. To me, it was a miracle. I guarded those flares like they were made of gold. I wouldn't waste them unless I was certain a ship was close enough to see them. By the end of the 11th month, I barely recognized myself. My hair was long and tangled, bleached by the sun. My skin was dark and weathered. My body was pure muscle and sinew. I'd lost probably 45 pounds. The person staring back at me from the stream's surface looked feral, wild, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. All those hours of solitude had honed my thoughts to a razor's edge. I planned every detail of my revenge, playing it out 1,000 times, anticipating every variable. During those final weeks before my rescue, I spent hours each day going through mental exercises, keeping my mind sharp. I'd recite everything I knew about Ethan's business dealings, testing my memory against itself. The account numbers had to be perfect. The dates had to be exact. One mistake could undermine everything. I remembered the night I'd accidentally walked in on Ethan's video call with someone whose face he'd quickly blocked from the camera. He'd been furious, more furious than I'd ever seen him. He'd accused me of spying, of trying to interfere with his work. I'd apologized profusely, convinced I'd done something terrible. Now I understood he'd been afraid I'd seen or heard something incriminating. That video call had been on March 15th, 2 years ago. The person on the other end had said something about the Singapore transfer before Ethan muted them. Singapore. I turned that word over in my mind like a stone. What did Ethan have in Singapore? I remembered another incident. This one from our honeymoon. We'd been in Bali and Ethan had spent an entire afternoon locked in our hotel room on his laptop while I waited by the pool. When he finally emerged, he'd been relaxed, almost giddy. He ordered expensive champagne and told me we could afford anything I wanted now. A big deal just closed, he'd said. Our honeymoon had been in June, 18 months ago. What deal closes during someone's honeymoon? What kind of person prioritizes work over their new spouse unless that work is something they can't trust anyone else to handle? These memories formed a web, each strand connecting to others. I could see the pattern now, clear as day. Ethan had been building his scheme for years, probably long before he'd met me. Marrying me had been part of the plan, too. A way to look stable and trustworthy to potential investors. The devoted husband with a pretty wife made for good optics when you were convincing people to hand over their life savings. I thought about the dinner parties we'd hosted. Ethan had always invited the same types of people, older couples, recently retired, sitting on substantial nest eggs. He charmed them with talk of market trends and investment opportunities. I'd play the perfect hostess, serving canapés and making small talk while Ethan planted seeds that would later bloom into fraudulent investment schemes. I'd been a prop in his con. The realization made me want to scream, but instead I channeled that rage into my survival and my planning. Every fish I caught, every fire I built, every sunrise I witnessed was a victory over Ethan's intentions. He'd meant for me to die here, terrified and alone. Instead, I was thriving in ways he'd never anticipated. The island had taught me things I'd never have learned in my old life. I understood now how little I'd actually needed, how much of my previous existence had been artificial padding around an empty core. The designer clothes, the expensive dinners, the carefully curated social media presence, all of it had been a costume I wore to play the role Ethan had assigned me. Out here, stripped of everything, I'd found something real. Strength I didn't know I possessed. Resilience that surprised even me. A kind of clarity that only comes when you're reduced to pure survival. I'd also discovered I was smarter than Ethan had ever given me credit for. He dismissed my intelligence, called my career cute, suggested my contributions were less valuable than his. He'd made me feel small and dependent, but my mind was a thing that would ultimately destroy him. Because I'd figured out something else during my months of isolation. Ethan wasn't just running a Ponzi scheme or a simple embezzlement operation. He was laundering money for someone else. That Singapore connection, the hushed phone calls, the offshore accounts in multiple countries, it all pointed to something bigger than a lone financial analyst stealing from his clients. Ethan was a middleman. And if I could prove that, if I could provide authorities with evidence of the larger operation, I wouldn't just be bringing down my attempted ender. I'd be dismantling an entire criminal network. The thought filled me with a fierce sense of purpose. My survival wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. Other people were victims of whatever Ethan was involved in. Other families had lost their savings, their futures, their security. By exposing Ethan, I'd be helping them, too. I started composing testimony in my head, practicing how I'd explain everything to investigators. I'd need to be credible, coherent, detailed. I couldn't come across as a traumatized victim making wild accusations. I needed to be precise, professional, unshakable. So, I rehearsed. Standing on the beach, I'd deliver my testimony to imaginary FBI agents. I'd answer their hypothetical questions, anticipate their skepticism, provide additional details to corroborate my claims. I must have looked insane, gesturing at the empty air, conducting full conversations with people who weren't there. But the practice kept my mind engaged and prepared me for what was coming. I also thought a lot about what I'd do after Ethan was behind bars. My old life was gone. I understood that. I couldn't go back to being the person I was before the island. That version of me had died the moment I woke up on that beach. But who would I become instead? The question fascinated me. I had a chance to rebuild myself from scratch, to choose who I wanted to be rather than accepting what others expected of me. Maybe I'd go back to school, study something I'd always been interested in but never pursued. Marine biology, perhaps. I'd certainly learned enough about ocean life to spark a genuine interest. Or environmental science, or psychology. I'd spent enough time analyzing my own trauma to be curious about the human mind. Maybe I'd write a book about my experience, not for money or fame, but to process what had happened. To turn my nightmare into something that might help someone else survive their own impossible situation. Or maybe I'd disappear entirely, start over somewhere new with a different name and a different life. The thought had appeal, becoming someone Ethan could never find, never touch, never influence, even from prison. These daydreams kept me company during my final weeks on the island. They gave me something to look forward to beyond simply revenge. Because revenge, I was learning, was cold comfort. It wouldn't heal me. It wouldn't undo the trauma. It would simply balance the scales. Real healing would come from building something new. From taking the lessons the island had taught me and applying them to whatever came next. I'd learned that I could survive anything. That I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. That I didn't need Ethan or anyone else to validate my worth. These lessons were the island's true gifts, more valuable than any revenge could ever be. Still, I wanted the revenge. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I wanted Ethan to feel a fraction of the fear and desperation I'd felt. I wanted him to understand that you can't just erase people when they become inconvenient. I wanted him to face consequences for once in his privileged, consequence-free life. The wanting didn't make me a bad person. I decided it made me human. And after almost a year of being reduced to pure survival instinct, reclaiming my humanity, even the darker parts of it, felt like an achievement. Then, on day 362 of my exile, I saw the ship. It was mid-morning. I was checking my fishing traps in the lagoon when I noticed something on the horizon. At first, I thought it was a cloud formation, but clouds don't have straight edges. Clouds don't move with such purpose. My heart began to pound. I scrambled out of the water and ran for my shelter where I'd stored the flare gun. My hands shook as I loaded the first flare. I climbed to my signal fire spot, a clearing on a hill with a good view of the ocean, and waited. The ship was getting closer, but it wasn't heading directly toward the island. It was going to pass maybe 2 miles offshore. I lit my signal fire, which I kept prepared for exactly this moment. Black smoke billowed into the clear sky. Then I fired the flare. The bright red projectile arced into the sky, leaving a trail of smoke. I loaded the second flare, waited, fired again. The ship was still coming, but had it seen me? I loaded my last flare. My hands were steadier now. I tracked the ship's movement, calculated the angle, and fired. This time, I saw the ship alter course. It was turning toward the island. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by a cascade of emotions I couldn't quite name. Relief, yes. Joy, maybe. But underneath it all was something colder, harder. Anticipation. Ethan thought I was dead. Ethan thought he'd gotten away with it. The revenge I had planned would be both devastating and sweet. The ship, a commercial fishing vessel called the Pacific Promise, reached the island 2 hours later. They couldn't get too close because of the shallow waters and rocky outcrops, so they sent a small motorboat to shore. 3 men approached me cautiously. I must have looked like a madwoman, standing on the beach in my tattered dress, hair wild, skin burned dark by the sun. "Miss," one of them called, "are you all right?" I opened my mouth and realized I hadn't spoken to another human being in almost a year. My voice came out as a croak. "I need help." They wrapped me in blankets, gave me water, asked gentle questions. I told them my name and that I'd been stranded after a boating accident. I didn't mention Ethan yet. That conversation would come later, and not with them. On the ship, Captain Sanchez, a weathered man, gave me his cabin and radioed the Coast Guard. He offered me food, but my stomach had shrunk so much I could only eat a few bites. He offered me clothes, and I gratefully changed out of the rags I'd been wearing for a year. "You're lucky to be alive," Captain Sanchez said. "That island isn't on any major shipping routes. We only came this way because we were following a tuna school." "Lucky," I repeated. The word felt strange in my mouth. The Coast Guard helicopter arrived 6 hours later. They airlifted me to a hospital in Hawaii where doctors examined me with a mixture of professional concern and undisguised curiosity. Dehydration, malnutrition, various infections, sun damage, but overall remarkably healthy given the circumstances. "You're incredibly resilient," the attending physician told me. "Most people wouldn't have survived a month in those conditions." "I had a reason to survive," I said. They contacted my emergency contact, my sister Chloe, who nearly fainted when she heard my voice on the phone. She'd been told I was dead. There had been a funeral and everything. "Ethan said you fell overboard," she sobbed. "He said they searched for days but couldn't find you." "Oh my God, I can't believe you're alive." "Is Ethan still in Chicago?" I asked. "Yes, wait, you want to see him after everything you've been through?" "I have some questions for him." The news of my rescue made headlines. "Woman survives year on deserted island," screamed the papers. Reporters tried to get interviews. The hospital had to post security to keep them away. Everyone wanted to know how I'd survived, what I'd eaten, how I'd maintained my sanity. No one was asking the right questions yet, but they would. I was discharged after 3 days with strict instructions to take it easy and attend follow-up appointments. Chloe flew down to Hawaii to bring me home. On the plane, she filled me in on everything that had happened since my disappearance. Ethan had reported me missing the day after the cruise. He'd said we'd been drinking, celebrating our anniversary, and when he woke up, I was gone. He'd called the Coast Guard immediately. There had been a massive search operation that lasted 2 weeks before they called it off. My body was never found, but with the currents in that area and the time that had passed, authorities concluded I'd drowned. Ethan had played the grieving husband perfectly. He'd cried at my funeral. He'd given a moving eulogy about our love and all the plans we'd had together. He'd moved out of our house because it was too painful to be there without me. He'd even started a small scholarship fund in my name. Everyone felt so terrible for him, Chloe said. He seemed absolutely destroyed. I bet he did, I murmured. What Ethan hadn't counted on was me coming back from the dead. We landed in Chicago late in the evening. Chloe wanted to take me to her house, let me rest, ease back into civilization. But I had other plans. Take me to Ethan, I said. Are you sure? Maybe you should wait until, take me to Ethan. She drove me to his new apartment in the Seaport district. Expensive area. He must have already cashed in some of that life insurance money. The thought made my blood boil. I told Chloe to wait in the car. This confrontation would be private. The doorman tried to stop me. I still looked pretty rough despite my new clothes and cleaned-up appearance, but I told him my name and watched his face go pale. He stammered something about calling Mr. Ashford, but I was already heading for the elevator. Ethan lived on the 15th floor. I knocked on his door, my heart hammering in my chest. This was the moment I'd fantasized about for a year. The moment I'd see his face when he realized his plan had failed. The door opened. Ethan stood there in expensive loungewear, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking tanned and relaxed. He saw me, and the glass fell from his hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. "Hello, Ethan?" I said. "Miss me?" His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, disbelief, fear, and finally a desperate attempt at joy. "Oh my God, you're alive! I can't believe. How did you? Where have you been?" He reached for me and I stepped back. "Don't, sweetheart. I've been going crazy with worry. The Coast Guard said you probably drowned, but I never gave up hope." Stop lying," I said quietly. "I know what you did." His face changed again, the mask slipping. For just a moment, I saw the real Ethan. Cold, calculating, with an intent to harm. Then he recovered, forcing confusion onto his features. "What are you talking about? You fell overboard. I looked for you. You drugged me. You dumped me on that island. You left me there to die so you could collect my life insurance. That's insane. You must have hit your head. The trauma, I remember everything, Ethan. The champagne tasting bitter. Your face right before I passed out. And when I woke up on that beach, I saw you. I saw you on the yacht waving goodbye, telling me I'd never see me again." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, and there was nothing warm in the sound. "You can't prove any of that. It's your word against mine, and you've been alone on an island for a year. Who's going to believe you're in your right mind?" "Maybe you're right," I conceded. "Maybe I can't prove what you tried to do." He relaxed slightly, taking that as victory. "But I can prove fraud," I continued. "I can prove embezzlement. I can prove that you've been running an investment scam for the last 5 years, stealing millions from your clients. I can prove that Marcus Thorne has evidence of all of it. That he's been collecting documentation because you are cutting him out." Ethan's face went white. "How could you possibly?" "I had a lot of time to think on that island. A lot of time to remember things. I always had an excellent memory. You used to say it yourself. Account numbers, client names, conversations. I overheard the Cayman account ending in 4721. The Luxembourg account ending in 9382. The shell corporation in Nevada called Harbinger Investments. The falsified statements you sent to the Miller family, the Garcia family, the Johnson family. Should I go on?" He stared at me, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out if I really knew what I claimed to know. I did. Every number, every name, every detail I painstakingly reconstructed during my months of solitude. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything," I said. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to the police. I'm going to the FBI. I'm going to the families you stole from. And I'm going to Marcus Thorne, who I suspect will be very interested in making a deal to testify against you. They'll arrest you, too. You were my wife. They'll think you were part of it. I was never part of your business dealings. You kept me isolated, remember? You made sure I had no access to your accounts, no knowledge of your work. You made me quit my job. You controlled every aspect of my life. It was another way to control me. But now it's going to save me and destroy you." Ethan lunged forward, grabbing my arm. For a moment, I saw real violence in his eyes. He was considering ending my life right here, right now. Consequences be damned. But I'd spent a year learning to survive. My body moved on instinct, twisting his arm and using his momentum to throw him off balance. He stumbled backward, crashing into a side table. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice deadly calm. "I'm not the woman you left on that island. That woman was weak, dependent, controllable. I'm someone else now." I turned and walked toward the door. "You'll never make this stick," he shouted after me. "I'll fight you on everything. I'll make your life hell." I looked back at him. This man I'd once loved. This man who tried to end my life. "You already did," I said. "But I survived. Can you say the same?" Over the next few weeks, I watched Ethan's life collapse with methodical satisfaction. The FBI opened an investigation based on my testimony and the detailed information I provided. Marcus Thorne, facing his own charges, did exactly what I predicted and cut a deal, turning over mountains of evidence against Ethan. The life insurance company, thrilled not to pay out $2 million to a potential who tried to end me, hired a team of investigators to prove Ethan had attempted to end my life. They found the private yacht owner who remembered Ethan acting nervous and insisting on specific departure times. They found Ethan's search history on his work computer showing he'd researched remote islands and survival rates for castaways. They found receipts for sleeping pills purchased under a fake name at a pharmacy 2 towns over from where we lived, bought a week before our trip. The incident charge stuck. After all, Ethan's assets were frozen. His clients sued him. His reputation was demolished. The news coverage was relentless, the man who tried to destroy his wife and steal millions, undone by her miraculous survival. I learned from the prosecutors that Ethan had been living off credit and borrowed money from associates while waiting for the insurance payout. The death certificate process was still ongoing when I returned. He planned to have me declared legally dead through a maritime court, which could happen much faster than the typical 7-year waiting period for missing persons. My resurrection had stopped that process cold, leaving him deeply in debt to some very dangerous people. As for me, I moved in with Chloe while I figured out my next steps. The world I'd left behind felt alien now. Supermarkets overwhelmed me with their abundance. Sleeping in a soft bed felt strange after a year on the ground. I jumped at sudden noises. I hoarded food even though I knew I didn't need to. But I was alive, and I was free, and Ethan was going to prison for a very long time. Was it worth it? Chloe asked me one evening. The revenge, I mean, does it make up for what happened? I thought about that question. Nothing could give me back the year I'd lost. Nothing could erase the trauma of nearly dying alone on that island. Nothing could restore my innocence or my ability to trust. But watching Ethan lose everything he valued, his freedom, his wealth, his reputation, did provide a certain cold satisfaction. It doesn't make up for it, I said. But it helps. The trial was scheduled for 6 months away. I'd have to testify, relive everything in front of cameras and journalists, and Ethan himself. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I'd do it. I'd survived worse. In the meantime, I started therapy, started rebuilding my life, started figuring out who I was now that I was no longer Ethan's wife or the woman on the island. It wasn't easy. Some days I felt barely human, like I'd left too much of myself on that beach. My therapist, Dr. Emily Hayes, specialized in trauma survivors. She had kind eyes and never pushed me to talk before I was ready. During our 3rd session, she asked me something no one else had. Do you feel guilty for surviving? The question caught me off guard. Why would I feel guilty? Many trauma survivors do, she explained. You endured something that should have destroyed you. Part of you might feel like you don't deserve to have made it through. I sat with that for a moment, really examining my feelings. No, I finally said, I don't feel guilty. I feel proud. I did everything right. I fought for every single day I was out there. Dr. Hayes smiled. Good. Hold on to that. But there were other emotions I struggled with. Anger, obviously, oceans of it directed at Ethan, but also at myself for not seeing the warning signs. Paranoia that made me check locks multiple times and look over my shoulder constantly. Hypervigilance that left me exhausted by the end of each day. And then there was the strange, complicated grief for my old life. I didn't miss Ethan, not even a little. But I missed the version of myself who had believed in love and partnership. I missed the innocence of thinking marriage meant safety. I missed trusting people. That's normal, Dr. Hayes assured me. You're mourning the loss of your worldview. It's as legitimate as mourning a person. The media attention didn't help my recovery. Everyone wanted to interview me, to hear the story of the woman who survived a year alone. Publishers offered book deals. Producers wanted to option my life story for movies. Survivors of other traumas reached out, treating me like some kind of inspiration. I turned down most of it. I wasn't ready to commodify my nightmare for public consumption. Maybe someday, but not now. Now I needed privacy and space to heal. Marcus Thorne reached out too, asking to meet. I was hesitant. He'd been part of Ethan's schemes after all, but my attorney, Daniel Lee, advised me to hear him out. We met at a coffee shop in Evanston. Marcus looked older than I remembered, worn down by legal troubles and guilt. He ordered a black coffee with shaking hands. I need you to know something, he said without preamble. I suspected Ethan was planning something with you. I didn't know what, but I saw him researching islands and life insurance policies. I told myself it was none of my business. The confession hung between us. You could have warned me, I said quietly. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. He met my eyes. I was a coward. I was so focused on covering my own ass, on getting out of the business with Ethan before it all collapsed, that I ignored signs someone might get hurt. I'm sorry. An apology couldn't undo what had happened, but I appreciated the honesty. Your testimony is going to put him away for a long time. Not long enough, Marcus said bitterly. But it's something. He slid a folder across the table. This is everything I have on the Singapore connection. The FBI already has copies, but I thought you should see it, too. You were right. Ethan was laundering money for a larger operation. The people he was working for, they're still out there. A chill ran down my spine. Are they dangerous? Extremely. But you helped the FBI identify them. They're making arrests now. Not just here, but internationally. You didn't just stop Ethan. You helped dismantle the whole network. After Marcus left, I sat in that coffee shop for a long time, processing what he told me. I'd known intellectually that I was part of something bigger. But hearing it confirmed was different. I'd made a real difference. My survival had meant something beyond personal revenge. The thought gave me a sense of purpose I badly needed. Chloe noticed the change in me after that meeting. You seem lighter, she observed over dinner that night. I think I'm starting to understand why all of this happened, I said. Not that Ethan had a good reason. There's no justification for what he did. But I can see how my survival served a larger purpose. Other people are safer now because I made it off that island. Chloe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're the strongest person I know. I laughed, though my eyes stung with tears. I didn't feel strong out there. Most of the time, I felt terrified and small and completely overwhelmed. That's what makes it strength, she said. Being terrified and doing it anyway. As the weeks passed, I slowly began reclaiming pieces of my life. I reconnected with old friends who had mourned my death. I visited my parents' graves. They died in a car accident when I was in college, and I found myself wishing they could see how strong I'd become. I even started looking at apartments, ready to move out of Chloe's guest room and into my own space. But the nightmares persisted. Almost every night, I'd dream I was back on the island. Sometimes Ethan would appear, standing on the beach, laughing at me. Sometimes I'd see ships on the horizon that never came closer. Sometimes I'd wake up screaming, convinced I could taste salt water and feel sand beneath me. The nightmares may never completely go away, Dr. Hayes warned me gently. Trauma changes the brain, but they should become less frequent and less intense over time. I focused on the things I could control. Physical therapy to address the damage done to my body during my year of survival. Nutritional counseling to help me maintain healthy eating habits after months of scarcity. Meditation and mindfulness practices to manage my anxiety. And I prepared for the trial. Daniel Lee met with me weekly, going over my testimony, preparing me for cross-examination, making sure I understood the legal process. Ethan's defense attorney would try to paint me as unreliable, traumatized, possibly delusional. We needed to counter that narrative with clear, credible testimony backed by hard evidence. You're going to do great, Daniel assured me after one particularly grueling practice session. You're one of the most composed witnesses I've ever worked with. I've had a lot of practice, I said dryly. 3 months after my rescue, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Ethan, forwarded through his attorney. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was short. Ethan claimed he still loved me, that everything had been a mistake, that he panicked and made terrible decisions. He begged me to drop the charges, to give him another chance, to remember the good times we'd had together. I read it twice, then showed it to Daniel. Classic abuser tactic, he said immediately. He's trying to manipulate you emotionally because he knows the legal case against him is airtight. You don't have to respond. I know, I said. But I want to. Daniel advised against it, but I wrote back anyway. My letter was even shorter than Ethan's. You taught me that actions matter more than words. Your actions tried to end me. My actions are going to make sure you never hurt anyone else again. See you in court. I didn't sign it with love or any pleasantries. I just signed my name and sent it off. That night, for the first time since my rescue, I didn't have nightmares. Maybe taking that final bit of control back had given my subconscious permission to rest. But I was alive, and that was something. That was everything. On day 418, after being abandoned, 56 days after being rescued, I received a call from the prosecutor handling Ethan's case. They'd found something unexpected during their investigation. Ethan had taken out the life insurance policy on me, yes. But he'd also taken out another policy 6 months earlier on his previous girlfriend, who had died in a suspicious boating accident, whose body had never been recovered. "We're reopening that investigation," the prosecutor told me. "Based on the pattern of behavior, we think he may have done this before. You may not have been his first victim, but because you survived, you'll be his last." I hung up the phone and walked out onto Chloe's balcony. The Chicago skyline stretched before me, familiar and foreign at once. Somewhere in this city, Ethan sat in a jail cell, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this, still convinced he was smarter than everyone else. He tried to end me twice over, once on that island, and once by destroying my sense of self, my independence, my power. He'd wanted to reduce me to nothing. Instead, he forged me into something harder than he could ever imagine. I thought about that woman on the beach a year ago, watching her husband sail away, screaming his name until her voice broke. I thought about the rage that had kept her alive through those early, desperate days. I thought about the revenge she planned during long, lonely nights. The revenge had been devastating, yes, and sweet, certainly, but it turned out that the real victory wasn't just destroying Ethan. It was discovering that I was strong enough to survive anything, even that. If you had been in my place, what would you have done differently?